So friends, for today's video, I wanted to do a tier ranking of 25 books that are listed as best of Booktok. I have in the past done a tier ranking of Booktok books, and I'll have that video linked. I ensured, though, that for today there was no overlap between the books that I ranked over there versus the ones I'm ranking here, because I want to ensure that if you do like watching this sort of video, that you have something else you can watch and it's not a repeat of the same thing. That said, I also want to state that this is part of a little mini video series that I'm doing where I'm kind of diving into trends and assessing specific things. Booktok, of course, is something that gets brought up frequently, and it is somewhat of a trendsetter when it comes to what is popular, which is part of why I just kind of wanted to have a fun tier ranking of these sorts of books that are on those lists. But I also want to state that if you are more interested in the conversational side of things, I have done a couple of videos where I go through things to do with Booktok. I am going to be doing a formal trends analysis video, so be on the lookout for that one, and if you're interested in the others, I'll have them linked. But jumping into it, I am going to have 6 tiers for today, and we're going to have 2 middle tiers that I'm going to start with, and then the way I like to do my tier rankings is to start in the middle and then go into the extremes, as I just think it's kind of more fun to have what I would consider to be the worst books and the best books. I like having those at the end. Interestingly, typically I find those extremes are the potentially most controversial or surprising takes, but actually today, I think that my middle tiers are the most surprising, but I want to give some information about the tiers themselves. So the 2 middle tiers, we have yeah and nah, and this is a pretty good representation, actually, of my thoughts on these. The yeah category is just like, yeah, I had fun. That was a nice story. Maybe not the most memorable. I don't know that it impacted me greatly, but I enjoyed the reading experience. I actually kind of feel like there is a place for those sorts of stories as well, because my favorite sorts of stories tend to be the ones that I am taken through a roller coaster of emotions, and sometimes I don't want to be taken through a roller coaster of emotions. Sometimes I just want to enjoy my reading experience and be like, that was nice, and then move on. Nah category is just books that are essentially the same as far as my feelings in the yeah category. It's just they weren't really for me. Interestingly, if I were to more formally give star ratings, some of the books that are in the nah category, I might actually rate higher than some of the books that are going to be in the category above, because maybe I think that they're better written, or I feel like the themes are more significant and important. But I don't know. If you don't know, I don't give star ratings to books, because with how much social media, while there's so many great things about social media and its impacts on reading and books, I also think sometimes, though, it can lead to we just want everything quick. And I do feel like star ratings contribute to this, like, oh, should I pick this up? And you just see someone's star rating and you're not really interested in the conversations surrounding it and having deep dives or having reviews. You just want to know what was the star rating. And I don't like reducing books to a star rating. That said, though, I really want to be clear that I actually think some of the books maybe in this 4th tier are maybe arguably better, but it's all subjective and we're not going to dive into that today. I just am kind of maybe overly cautious about giving some context here, because I actually think today my most controversial takes are not the extremes. I think my most controversial takes are the ones in the 3rd versus the 4th tier. Then we have no, which is just, I didn't hate this. This isn't going to lead to the biggest rant of my life, but I didn't like it. And then we have the yes, which is like, oh, this was really good. I really liked this. It's pretty self-explanatory. Then we have the why category, which is, why did I read this? Why did I not DNF this? Why is this popular? It's kind of that where you're just sort of questioning. Then we have the absolutely tier, which is like, oh yeah, absolutely. This is amazing. I absolutely love this. This is fantastic. I'm probably not going to stop talking about it. Or I think this is fantastic and I think other people should read it. It's just one of those, I think this is great, no questions asked sort of tiers. All that said, jumping into it, starting with the middle, I'm going to start with the nah tier. And the first 2 are really controversial. So let's just get these 2 out of the way. Name of the Wind and The Poppy War. Name of the Wind, I do agree that it is beautifully written. I'm not one of those people that thought it was great, and I'm upset that the third one's not out, so I've retroactively decided I dislike the first one to punish Patrick Rothfuss or anything like that. I just really didn't like the main character, and I recognize there's a lot of conversations about, is Kvothe a reliable narrator, or is there a lot of embellishing going on because the setup is that this character is sort of telling you their life story? It doesn't matter. I don't like them. I don't like the way that they tell you about themselves. If it's true or not true, it still bothers me that I just don't like them. If they're representing the best of themselves, I'm like, the best of you still sucks. I really don't like Kvothe. And as stated, I think the writing is beautiful. And I was engaged for a while in that one. But I really don't like that character. And I will say I'm quite a character-driven reader. If I really dislike a character, and not in a fun way, because sometimes it's fun to hate characters. If I really dislike a character in a like, oh my gosh, kind of way, then it's pretty hard for me to like the story, unless it's multiple perspectives and I can escape them sometimes. But you can't escape Kvothe. He's kind of it. He's the person the story is centered around. The Poppy War, I remember quite vividly while reading. I kept going back and forth between being really hooked and then kind of, I was like, I don't, and just kind of going back and forth between enjoying it, not really enjoying it. I really liked what happened. I don't really like what just happened. I kept going back and forth on that, and then it kind of ended on I didn't really like what just happened. No. And that's sort of just how my feelings for it remained. I didn't really love this one. I have considered numerous times continuing on with the series, maybe rereading the first book and continuing on. But every time I consider doing that, I'm like, there's so many books I want to read. And if I'm going to reread something, I kind of want to reread something I really like. So it has remained in this spot. Interestingly, a lot of people compare these two to each other. So maybe there's something to be said about, I just don't love this kind of protagonist, or maybe there's certain aspects to the setup I don't love. But regardless, these are both in this category. Next one is you could argue, self-help nonfiction book called Atomic Habits. This isn't a situation where I feel like everything stated in this book is stupid or irrelevant or unhelpful. It's just that I have a hard time with any kind of self-help book, because oftentimes one of two things happen while I'm reading. I start inserting exceptions, meaning if it's like, you should try this, I'm like, yeah, most people, but what about people that have this going on? Or what about people with this going on? And I start to just kind of play through in my head, even if I'm not referring to myself, I just start trying to think of outliers and people that don't have the means, or people that don't have the money, or people that don't have the time. I start kind of inserting that sort of person into the advice, and I'm like, this doesn't help them, and you're presenting it like it's universal, and that's frustrating to me. And it's probably unfair, because I think most people are capable of reading a self-help book and figuring out which things can I apply to my own life and which things are unrealistic and I can't. And I recognize that most people can do it, but I still just get irritated on behalf of people who aren't able to utilize this information, and it's presented like it's universal. I think that's the key factor. If it's very clear, like, if this is something that you can apply to your life, I would recommend it. When it's presented in that way, I can be more understanding and forgiving, but I feel like it's always presented in a way as if the person speaking has absolute authority on their advice that they're giving. And I just don't like that trend in life at all. I'm tired of people speaking with authority over their opinions, meaning they present it like it's a fact when it is an opinion. Now, in Atomic Habits, the reason this is up higher and not lower is because I think a lot of the information is valuable, and a lot of it is useful, and a lot of it is backed by various different things that have been done that present certain results. And the research has shown, like, actually people are able to do this more often and have these results if they do this on a day-to-day basis, or whatever the thing may be. But I presented that on one hand, I start filling in the blank of like all the people that things don't work for. I also just found in this book, I didn't really get anything out of it, because so many of the habits they were talking about, I was like, yeah, I know. I know. And that's in part because sorry to bring this up, I feel like this comes up too often, but I majored in music, if you don't know. You have to really put in the time and effort, and you in part have to learn how to practice and how to be efficient. So a lot of the information that was presented in Atomic Habits, I was like, yeah, ask any musician, I feel like we know. But then I was like, oh, am I being a snob? Am I being like, I got it already? I suppose you plebeians might need this advice. Like, I didn't find it particularly useful. The remaining 3 in this category would be the Honey Witch, the Atlas 6, and the Serpent and the Wings of Night. I think in the past, the Serpent and the Wings of Night would have been higher. And I don't dislike this one. I had it for a little while. I read the sequel, so I obviously liked it enough to keep going, but I'm kind of considering this one as a duology. And as a duology, I felt like the second one ended up in its writing being a bit repetitive, and I thought the plot was lost a little bit. So it did kind of as a whole bring it a tiny bit down for me, but I still don't dislike this necessarily. And when it comes to fantasy romance, because that's what this is, I actually do think it does a lot of things that cater to my tastes, but I just overall don't love this one. The Atlas 6, I have considered continuing on with this series, and this one has had interesting pendulum swings where people were obsessed with it, and then a bunch of people picked it up because it was popular, and they're like, what the heck, why is this popular? And so it's gone back and forth between people thinking this is amazing and people thinking it's trash. And I kind of have fallen in the middle of like, oh yeah, I mean, I didn't dislike that, but I didn't really love it either. So that's why it's here. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then the Honey Witch, there were a lot of qualities to this one I did really enjoy, especially the relationship between the protagonist and her grandmother. However, I felt like this one, I would definitely read something else by this author, but I felt like this book in particular, it seemed as though we wanted to do so many various different things. Like we wanted this to fit within cozy, but we didn't quite have enough pieces of cozy for this to be cozy fantasy. And we almost wanted this to be fantasy romance, but we didn't spend that much time on the romance. We wanted this to be sort of a reflective story on grief, but we didn't spend that much time on that either. And then also there's an antagonist that's a pretty big deal at the end, but we didn't really lead up to that because we had so many of the other pieces of the other things, and it just kind of felt like it wasn't enough of any one thing. A different story perhaps could have embraced all those things and made it work and been a great melting pot genre bender, but this one I felt like it kind of had the reverse, where it had so many pieces of a lot of things, but none of it really quite ended up fitting together in a way that I found satisfying. Now for the ones in the yeah tier, we have The Will of the Many, and I know this is a booktube darling, and I know for most people this goes at the very top of a lot of lists, and I am going to see what I think of the sequel, certainly. I liked the first book, and I think there's a lot there that has a lot of implications of what might come that I have been intrigued by. However, I'm not necessarily yet enamored by this story the same way I feel a lot of other individuals are, but I still enjoyed it, and there's still a lot of aspects to it that I think are great. I do think some of the world building is similar to things that I've seen before and that I've read about before, but there are pieces of the world building that I find fascinating. The downside, though, is those pieces weren't explored really in the first book, which is why I'm like, oh, I feel like it's close. It's close to being higher, but I like the concept, but we haven't done as much with it as I want, so that's why I'm really looking forward to seeing what the second one does. We also have The Daughter of the Moon Goddess, and I like this author's world building as far as how everything is conveyed to you, how lush and beautiful and vivid and vibrant the setting is. I think for the 3 books I read by this author, it's true for every single one of them. The stories are nice, and they kind of perfectly capture what I described for the experience of, like, sometimes I don't want the highs and the lows all the time because it kind of is borderline taxing, even though that's what the best books for me represent, are those sort of taxing, they really take you through it. I don't always want that. Sometimes I want this sort of like breath of fresh air, just kind of like, that was nice. And I felt like that about Daughter of the Moon Goddess, like, that was nice. But that's about the full extent of it. We also have A Fate Inked in Blood and Once Upon a Broken Heart, and these are the 2 that I feel like if I said these, I guess I'm gonna have a tier ranking so you'll see it, but having these here and then having The Poppy War and Name of the Wind, having them in these respective categories, I feel like is just somebody's soul is dying a little bit. And I'm sorry for that, but this is an example of, like, I really thought that the themes were fantastic in The Poppy War, and there's a lot about the world that was really fascinating, and the action was cool, but it just ultimately didn't end up working for me, whereas Once Upon a Broken Heart is just, like, it's such nonsense, and it was kind of fun. And A Fate Inked in Blood it's just kind of a fun adventure fantasy romance story, emphasis on fun. It was just kind of like, this is a good time. And no, I don't know that I necessarily think that these are, like, The Poppy War, if just a few things had been tweaked, would be up at the top. But these 2 I don't think you could tweak them and they would go to the top. I feel like they're good versions of what they are, and what they are is this tier for me, which is just like, oh yeah, that was enjoyable. And then Spark of the Everflame, I do plan to continue on with this series, as I quite liked this first one, but this one, it was like I borderline considered putting it in a tier above, because I especially really liked the fact that we actually got to see how this character fit within a family unit, which is so rare in fantasy stories. And it's, even though categorized as fantasy romance, it's not something that is an emphasis in the first book necessarily. I just felt like the way the author handled the world, the balance of that compared to dissecting the character's role within her family, how that role has changed after her mother goes missing. I just felt like it balanced a lot of things really well. I was engaged and I liked it. And the reason that it's not in a tier higher is because the things in the tier higher, I'm like, oh, I don't know that I think that of this book. Like, I really like the books in the tier above this. And I don't know, I love this book on that level. But I also think maybe if I had a half in between the second and the third tier, it would maybe go in there. But I don't know. I also am curious to see what the author does with the rest of the story, because I liked the first book, but kind of similar to what I said about The Will of the Many, I want to see how we build upon the foundation that was laid out for us within that first installment. I don't have too many in the no category, so I'll just go ahead and get this out of the way. We have Book of Night by Holly Black. I didn't despise this book with all of my heart and soul by any means, but it didn't really work for me. This actually did prompt, though, a whole video dedicated to, wait, this is a best of Booktok book, because that was news to me. And then the next one that is within this tier would be A Dowry of Blood. This is another example of something where I think the themes are really important and really powerful. The narrative decision, I think, is interesting and unique. I just didn't find that this worked for me basically at all. The yes tier, I have a few more than I had in the no tier. The first one on the yes tier would be the Murderbot Diaries. I know that when people like the Murderbot Diaries, they really like it. And for me, I definitely enjoyed it. There are times where certain novellas I like more than others, which is, I think, what keeps this from being within the top tier for me. I really like it. I like this sort of apathy, the borderline apathy that Murderbot has just in general, and the questioning of their role within society, or what it even means to live. And I like all those questions and the sort of reflection of mental health that is represented through Murderbot. But sometimes the plots, I don't care about them at all. I just really like Murderbot. So I think that's part of what keeps it from being just a little bit higher. We also have two cozy fantasy stories, which would be The Spell Shop and Half of a Soul, or excuse me, it's just Half a Soul. And these both, I think, were really, really darling, really precious, really sweet. I can be picky about stories that have those adjectives applied to them, as sometimes it can feel so cotton candy cute that it ends up being too sweet for me. And these ones got close. I would say that especially of The Spell Shop. They got close, but they didn't quite cross that line, so they did still fit within just like, I thought this was really, really sweet. The Spell Shop, as stated, I feel like fits this more. It really is absolutely precious and darling. And then with Half a Soul, I just found the main character to be so likable, but quite different from a lot of our protagonists. I liked the reflection on the way that sort of high society and society in general, if it is doing okay, has a tendency to completely ignore things that are going on in the rest of the world. And you do see through the love interest the way that impacts them. It's really hard for them to exist within a world that feels like it turns a blind eye to atrocities and hardships. I actually feel like that was explored really well, while doing so within a story that was quite cute and cozy. So I feel like it had a really nice balance that worked quite well for me. And the last one within this category would be Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I read this one this year, and I definitely get why this author is really hyped, as I definitely think, one, the chemistry, because that's a big part of contemporary romance stories. I feel like the chemistry is always written really well. And I just in general find that just exploring our lives in a way that is very honest, and how we try to fit love within that when we have familial drama, when we have workplace situations that are difficult to navigate, and we're trying to find love within all of that. I do feel like Part of Your World explored that quite well. I do feel bad because if we look at my bottom tier, they do all fall under fantasy romance, unfortunately, which isn't to say that I really dislike fantasy romance or anything like that. And I should make known, if I haven't been clear already, that this is all very, very subjective as to what worked for me and what didn't. This is by no means me trying to imply that these books are terrible. They just didn't work for me. And the 3 books here would be When the Moon Hatched, Iron Flame, and From Blood and Ash. I think when I first read From Blood and Ash, I maybe didn't, I mean, and I don't hate this one. It doesn't really make me angry necessarily. I don't know that I personally think it's the best the genre has to offer. Iron Flame, I mean, Fourth Wing's writing style, it does grate a little bit. It's not the writing style for me. I don't like the main character. I think the stakes in the world are not great. And then for When the Moon Hatched, I liked a lot of the concepts in this, the world building. I really liked the very opening origin for the world, basically. I thought was the creation myth, I should say. I thought that was really unique and cool, and I liked the way that was written. And I kept I would get somewhat engrossed in what was happening, and then the main character is just so snarky and dumb. I thought she was dumb, so then I was just like, ah. And then that for, 780 pages or so, where I was just like, this is a lot. She's so annoying. But ones that did work for me, going to the very top, we have Kindred and Parable of the Sower. I was so excited to see that these are getting popular over on Booktok. Something that I think is a bit of a misconception is that Booktok is only ever hyping up romance stories or stories that have some kind of romantic element, which isn't true. You do find a wide range of stories that get popular on Booktok. And I have seen classics a number of times, but I had not seen in the past Kindred and Parable of the Sower. But seeing these two has made me so happy because I obviously think that they're absolutely fantastic. When we talk about stories that are really well done thematically, you could almost argue even thematically driven, I think both of these are fantastic. One of them, of course, Kindred, is a reflection on how you see generational trauma. And even if it's not something that is a spoken thing, just the way that things can play out and how you can't come out of the past unscathed, especially when things haven't really been resolved in present day. And just that there are these lasting impacts, and also just kind of assessing how things were in history and having a really, really blunt and honest portrayal of those things, and how you can be as compassionate and kind as possible, and it's not always going to change the impact that society can have on the minds of young and impressionable people and the cruelty that they're able to inflict. It's just, I think, exceptionally done. And then Parable of the Sower, I think it's almost the reverse in that rather than taking a reflection on the past, it's showing what the future could become. I actually think it'd be interesting to read these two books back to back and kind of have this going through timelines of just a cautionary tale and also a reflection on the past. I do think that that would be kind of an interesting reading experience, but regardless, I think these are both absolutely, absolutely amazing. The other books in my top are quite different from those two. We also have Blood Over Brighthaven. I am so glad that this is so loved, because when I picked this up, I was once again reminded of why I really love this author's works. I can't wait to see what else they write. I thought that this book was absolutely exceptional, really fit a lot of what I like in stories. It is very blunt and on the nose. It's not hiding what its themes are whatsoever. But regardless, I mean, some people, maybe that's not their thing. For other people, they like it. It just depends. But for me, I thought that they were explored well. And I also thought the world was fantastic. We are really looking at a very unlikable character, but in a way that I found engaging. And we also are seeing a really interesting magic system on top of everything. I just thought it was fantastic. And then last for this top, once again, very different from the previous ones, we have Just for the Summer, another Abby Jimenez book. And this one I just was really, really impressed with how well it explored the familial aspects of the story. I also really liked the characters. I liked the build-up between their relationship, the things that you might anticipate liking from a contemporary romance story. I think all those things were done well, but for me, the thing that took it to the next level was how exceptionally it explored not just the familial relationship and how taxing it can be when somebody represents the role that in this particular story that the mother represents, but the ways that in trying to avoid pain and trying to avoid having the feeling replicated that the mother inflicted upon the daughter, and trying to avoid that, you start exhibiting the very behaviors that your mother did to you that led to you having pain. And so you're starting to do those same exact things, and it's just this cycle. And I thought it was so well done, on top of enjoying finding these two people falling in love, and I thought all of that was also really exceptional. But that's it for a number of books that are apparently, as of right now, considered to be best of Booktok books. And I know some of the middle section was maybe a little controversial, but that is currently my thoughts on these. I'd love to know, what are some other books that you have found to be exceptionally popular on Booktok that you really love, or maybe ones that you don't get the hype for? And just in general, if you have any thoughts, feel free to leave them. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.